So, hi everyone, I'm here with Jimmy Hosang, who's the CEO of the Modular Analytics Company today. Jimmy, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe just describe a little bit about, I suppose, what you guys do and what you've been up to over the sort of the last 12 months or so.
Yeah, so we like to describe ourselves as a proudly different AI company that specializes in conversational intelligence. And what we really want to do is we want to maximize the value of every customer interaction, specifically in contact center environments. A little bit of a potted history of myself was I come from a credit risk background. I did marketing, I did pricing. I was a bit like the littlest hobo. And then finally, I went contracting, and my first contracting gig was in a contact center. And I'd never properly worked in contact centers in an analytics environment before. Then all of a sudden, like it just lit a fire under me because the risk profiles, your marketing campaigns, like absence, sickness, holidays, it was such a diverse ecosystem that I just thought, this is where I kind of want to be. And this is where I've kind of been working over the last kind of 6 or 7 years. And then we started the Modular Analytics Company as an outcome-based consultancy to drive value in contact centers. But over the last year, we pivoted to more of a SaaS company as we proved out some of the fundamental products, which were around next best action. It was about speech analytics. It was about targeted coaching. And then we started to productize those, and they started to be released in earnest over the past 12 months.
And what's your feeling about, I suppose, from the contact center environment? I mean, the amount of data that there is available in the contact center is terrific. I mean, has that been a big gap in terms of making the most of it? And then how do we get access to more of that data? Because it feels sometimes like there's a lot of data that's just left on the table and we don't use it.
Well, people don't care about it in businesses. Like it's a huge annoyance for them, really. Like I feel like companies often, and C-suites in particular, they get drawn towards this the big shiny thing at the time. And the big shiny thing over the last few years, first of all, it was kind of big data. So it was like big data, like where do you get all of these digital touch points? And then that kind of led into, the digitization of customer contact. But nobody thought about, well, what about the humans that you've got interacting with your human customers, and how do you collect all of the information on them? Surely, like that is the starting point. What people tried to do was they tried to they saw the contact center and the diverse ecosystem and all of the potential data and all of the stuff that they've done wrong over the last 20 years in collecting data, and they thought to themselves, oh well, bugger that, we're not going to pick, that's too big and complex, so we'll just leapfrog that and we'll digitize it. But that's not how human beings work. Like, and they tried to like piggyback over the problems of the contact center, tried to go straight to digitization, automation, chatbots, AI, that kind of technology there. But if you actually look, like, I think 30 years ago, they said that contact centers were going to shrink, and actually they've grown. And they've grown because you've not fixed the fundamental problems of how you create a great human-to-human interaction. Because it's only when you do that that you can then start to automate and digitize and do AI.
Yeah, and I suppose that's sort of like the speech analytics that's become quite a big theme over the last 6 months. I'd say it's sort of been accelerating. Obviously, you guys are at the heart of that as well. I mean, is that around sort of optimizing that human-to-human interaction? Because again, in speech, there's huge amounts of data that's sort of untapped, and almost like as humans, we process it, but it's trying to get that into some sort of machine readable format. You can actually use it to help out, I suppose.
When I worked in marketing, marketing for loans and credit cards, and what I always said was digital marketing's easy because I build a predictive model and I deploy it onto a website, and the website generally doesn't have a bad day. It just does exactly what it's told. It's much more interesting to build a predictive model and then give a script to an agent and get them to try and deliver it in the most optimum way, because humans have bad days, humans have good days. The way in which it's delivered is very, very important. And so then, so coming from that marketing kind of credit risk background, and then going, well, I've deployed models, but my models aren't really performing as much as I thought they would. So, you know, I thought, just pick an example, but I thought a model would deliver kind of £1.5 million a year, like that I deployed into a contact center for upselling and cross-selling, and it's delivered, you know, a few £100,000. Why? So it was the why is it not delivering that kind of led me to using speech analytics to say, you know, what was the incoming sentiment of the customer, what was the reaction kind of sentiment of the agent, like did they actually say the things that they wanted them to say, and all of that really like culminated in how do you adhere to the processes that I'd created when it was about my campaign. So the use of speech analytics for me, like I think a lot of companies over the last kind of decade have I believe, have missold speech analytics, and it was expensive. Like transcribing audio historically had been very, very expensive, and therefore it became a speech analytics project became like a vacuum for all of the benefits. Like you had to cannibalize everything. You had to do everything. Whereas to me, speech analytics is just an input to better customer experiences and better agent coaching. It's another data set. It's another data set. It's kind of a big data set. And that's what I really want that's what I really focus on when it comes to speech.
What you're saying is kind of interesting, is if you almost like take a customer journey design, right? So it's almost like, and you have all these pieces and the logical processes that need to happen, but you've got to, I think you've got to include the human interaction execution element of that, and you've got to have measures to measure how it's getting executed. Are they following the process and procedures? Otherwise you don't get the benefits, right? So like the speech analytics piece sort of overlays around that quality measure and the execution measure, because if you miss that, then that's where you lose benefits.
100%. And but I always say, like, so when it comes to customer experience, we've all been in those workshops with those brown paper exercises where we go, well, this is the happy path, and this is the unhappy path. This is what happens, and then we go on the customer calls, and then it gets resolved or it doesn't get resolved. Well, actually, what you have to do is the customer call. You have to extrapolate that and look at those 6 minutes. Or the 12 minutes or the 45 minutes that customer called, and look at all of the journeys that happen within that conversation. Because that conversation, that human to human element, like a lot of, I'm going to go back again, like a lot of companies are trying to digitize their experience, but I think by digitizing their experience, they're actually removing some of the thing that makes them valuable. You know, the commoditizing experiences and the commodities. Well, if I'm just doing everything through a website, if another website does it exactly the same, then why should I be loyal? Whereas actually, you know, historically, and I think the brands that really, really understand their customers, they understand the value of human to human. That's why Apple has got these Apple stores where you go and have a human to human interaction. And so I think when we design experiences, it's looking at all of the touch points and looking at extrapolating the conversational touch points, looking at what is happy path within that call and what is unhappy path within that call, and redesigning them so that your agents get better outcomes.
And I suppose one of the good things about talking to human is, I mean, and if it's done right, is you can get to the point pretty quickly. So I can see, particularly in face to face, I can see the way you're reacting. I can hear what you're sort of intimating on the phone, or the way you're talking to them, and I can get to the point pretty quickly. And you sort of like you shortcut that getting the information quickly. I mean, done right. I mean, done wrong, and if you're following a process, then you get a long process, and that becomes frustrating. But it's almost like how do you use the humans to get to the point quickly and cut down time for the right customers? I suppose the same is true of arguably of digital processes, isn't it? Use the data to get to the point quickly.
In almost any scenario, it's easier to do voice than it is to type.
Yeah.
Like so, that's why I find like the chatbot technology and the endless spin that you get into when it comes to chatbots, or like I don't know how you call it, like artificial intelligence, because there's nothing intelligent about most of these chatbots. So artificial unintelligence, like you get caught in a loop of trying to get something done. Now, voice, we use our voice like much more than we did before through the use of smart tools like and smart homes. We have Alexa, we've got Siri, we've got Google Home. We use it more and more because we understand that, you know, that is the quickest way to do something. It's quicker than typing. And so where I think we became misguided around customer service a long time ago is we actually kind of broke customer service, made it look human to human customer service. We made it look rubbish, and then gave ourselves like reasons to digitize. You know, like long wait times in a contact center, like not arming your agents with the correct scripts and the correct tools to do the job properly. And then when it looked rubbish, we went, oh well, everybody wants to digitize. Nobody really wants to digitize. Like the digital or voice doesn't mean anything. People just want to get the stuff done as quickly as possible.
Yeah, so and it's a bit like we had some telephone issues this morning, and we were just saying it reminds me of a story, right? So I had some telephone issues, and I phoned up, and I was trying to get it resolved over the phone, and I was going round and round in circles, right? Eventually, I got an engineer to come out, and the engineer came out, and within 20 minutes, the whole thing had been fixed. He knew exactly what to do, and it's just around having specialist knowledge deployed at the right time, sort of there, and they know what to do, and they can just fix it straight away because they're experts, right?
Yeah, well, I just made a comment earlier. Like I'm moving home and I'm moving all of my services and things like that to my new house. And I was on with a chatbot with chat. I was moving my broadband. I started at 8:30 in the morning, and by 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I still not resolved it. So, and I'd kept moving on to other people. Obviously, I'm working, so then I have to jump onto something else. Then, like, I get passed on to somebody else. Then it goes on. Like, all I was doing was checking that my movement date for my broadband was correct, because I got an incorrect text message, and it took hours and hours and hours to get that done. Whereas I was moving some of my TV services. I put in some details, and they said, "Oh, can you please ring up?" I rang up, and within 20 minutes, it had been resolved by a contact center agent. So we don't monitor the amount of time. In many cases, we don't monitor the amount of time that's wasted by the consumer, like having to go through this process. We just see the operational efficiencies on the company side.
Yeah, so it's interesting to then do a bit of a deep dive around that, almost like the speech piece, and then how do you use the data, the speech analytics, to then make it more efficient, right, or make it get to the outcomes even quicker. That's interesting.
Well, what we actually do is we can maybe touch upon this later, but so I believe in scripts. So, 6 or 7 years ago, everybody kind of completely got turned off against scripts, and they said, no, you need to be an active listener, you need to be empathetic, you need to do this, you need to do that. But I come from a performing arts background, like, so all of the best performances that you've ever seen in any film, as natural as they look, come from a script. Like, so your best actors in the world, your Meryl Streep, your Robert De Niro's, like, you don't say to them, "Oh, we'll just make it up as you go along." Just actively listen. Like, they all have a script, and then they all learn how to perform it, and they work from the craft. And we've taken, and those are the very, very best. Yeah. What we do is we take thousands. We've got 1.2 million agents in the UK at the moment, contact center agents, and we kind of go, just all listen and then just react. I'm just not sure that improv. Look, like, so I hated improv, and I think I was like relatively good at it. But we just go on, just riff, just freewheel, and even and like, can you believe it? We actually say that, and I have had arguments with people. I was like, no, what we can do is we should design the best experiences from what we understand. We should use the best terminology, because there's certain terminology that is off-putting and puts people off. We should remove friction, and then we should use speech analytics to look at which parts of the journey is sentiment dropped off. Was that the right thing to say? Or just generally, like, is an agent like sticking to the script, or are they freewheeling? If they're freewheeling and getting good outcomes, maybe we should learn something from it. If they're freewheeling and getting bad outcomes, let's have a coaching conversation, and this is why you should be sticking to these scripts and sticking to these routes, because it gets you to better outcomes, both for yourself and for the customer.
Yeah, I suppose just going back to the acting piece, I'm not a performing art background, but it's almost like you test it, you learn, and then you do it again, and you test it and you learn, you do it again, and it might be slightly, every performance might be slightly different, but you're sort of constantly reinforcing and getting better, right? So you have to be able to control it. Mine's a science background. You have to be able to control it to be able to learn and then get better.
100%, and it's also like your motivation. So yeah, so how I would put it is like every performance, every phone call you have is slightly different, but you understand like the parameters that you're working to. But before you even get to that stage, you need your training wheels on. You need to go through it. And we talk about how long it takes to train. I think Malcolm Gladwell was 10,000 hours, but I'm not sure it's necessarily that's the case. But you should be putting some training wheels on people and going, look, this is what good looks like until you get, and then just get a groove, deliberate practice, like get into the groove of going through this. We go, oh, well, we don't want them to sound like robots. You don't want them to sound like robots, but you don't want to get into problems with the FCA. You don't want complaints. You don't want them to missell, all this type of stuff. So we should be giving them training wheels, and then when they start to get more confident, they'll just naturally they'll be able to freewheel a little bit.
Yeah. So it's the data, isn't it? And the data with the human, interacting with the human in terms of like, how do you then get better using data to learn and then gradually get better? I mean, for all of the stuff we're talking about.
Exactly. And look as well, what I find very, very amusing is we remove scripts for contact center agents, but to build a chatbot, then you have to have a script. You have to go, if they say this, say this. If they say this, say this. If they say this, say this. And the best chatbots are the most complicated because it's got all of the different decision trees in it. And then it makes decisions as you click through and as you respond and stuff. So we've given chatbots a better guidelines and a better start than we do our contact center agents.
So I was looking through some of the stuff that you guys do, and nudge had come up quite a bit in terms of like was going to chatbots, but I suppose that's also in terms of guidance or scripts for an agent as well, in terms of like how do you nudge the customer conversation along to get to better outcomes. How do you think about that, and how do you think about implementing nudge? Because it can be you have to use quite a lot of data to really understand what are the dynamics of how customers might react in that situation, those kind of things.
So you've got an interesting collections. I've got a real interest in behavioural science when it comes to collections and the collections industry, and I'd kind of be interested in your thoughts as well, because my belief is I worked in collections and credit risk during the 2008-2009 financial crisis. Really, really interesting time. But what I found was we actually did a lot of disrepair to like our customers, because we started to treat them like pretty horribly, like my belief. And I've always had this opinion that there are certain types of customers who can't pay or won't pay. There's certain types of people who psychologically are like very responsible. You've kind of got like a matrix. In fact, many times in credit risk, you start to do these matrices, and it's these people in the middle that are the most valuable, really, especially to any kind of credit risk or credit kind of company, because they're always hovering between you don't want them to be so good that they just pay off all straight away. And even the people at the top end here, even if they are like, these people don't really need credit. It's probably they've just got it. It's always these people. So you're always like walking a bit of a fine line to get these people to behave in a certain way, get them to pay on time and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And to that end, like it is about behavioral principles. It is like getting them to not be as impulsive, making sure that they understand when the direct debit's coming out, and making sure like they understand the impacts if they don't pay, things like that. And therefore, like, we can build the best kind of dialer models, collections models, and collections principles, but there must be some some, if not all of it, which is around training people to be better at managing credit.
Yeah, yeah. And I think it's also like, it makes me think of almost like politics, right? Which is elections are decided on the margin, like the people who are the swing voters,
Yeah.
right? And it's almost like that in terms of like collections. In terms, you've got the people up here who can pay, the people down here who really can't pay. But it's the difference from a company point of view is trying to persuade people on the margin, right? So it's like, how do you get the people who maybe they need a bit of a nudge to be able to pay and correct their credit? And it's like, how do you get further down that line rather than as much as the people at either ends, right? So you're making me think of that really. And can you use nudge to move those people up and make quicker payments because it's in their interest as well? What do you feel about transparency within that sort of nudge cycle? I mean, a part of it I think is also how are you transparent with what are the consequences of doing something? What are the consequences of your actions in terms of like joint responsibility? I mean, do you think transparency is a theme that's got to come across more?
Transparency is interesting. I've not thought so much about transparency just in and of itself. What we talk about is trust. So we have to build trust through our processes, and I think transparency is probably one of the things amongst others that ladders up into into trust. And I see a lot of people talk about their trust pilot scores and things like that now. Not 100% sure whether that is true trust. It's how through your conversations, through your messaging, through the way in which you behave, like how do you build trust with your customers to the point where, like, especially in financial services, that when they're in a crisis or when they need support, they come to you rather than thinking that you're an institution that always rips them off or just charges them necessarily, or does or practices in ways that that isn't ethical. And a lot of the stuff that we're doing at the moment isn't just around like, the data science or just nudging unnecessarily. It's how we identify customers who are distrustful of your business, and how through communications do we start to build more trust. But obviously that trust is two-way, like you have to behave ethically then. Like, and so I would say that I've not done a lot of thinking around transparency, but we've been doing a lot of things around trust.
Yeah, and how does it lead to trust in the end of the day, and how do you measure trust then at the end of the day, right? So, and how do you measure that it's getting better? So I like having data that you can actually show, look, we were here, now we're here, and these are the drivers of how you get from A to B. And it's like, how do you measure trust, and how do you actually measure that it's got better from a customer point of view?
Yeah, so we use proxies for trust. So the trust pilot score and stuff, it's not important, but I would say, like, so one, whether or not it's a trust measure, or whether or not it's or it's something psychological, something to do with your personality. But if you dropped into, if we built a model which was likelihood to go one payment in arrears, you would say that the people who were high likelihood to go one payment in arrears, and then a model which was upon going one payment in arrears, likelihood to contact. If you looked at the likelihood to contact model, what you'll find is the people who are low likelihood to contact and high likelihood to go under, those are the populations that are most distrustful of you, because they think you're now going to try and like hammer them, or rip them off, or you're going to go at them aggressively, blah 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 blah. And then what you try and do is try and look at the communications that have gone on with that customer over time, and see like why it would be that they don't want to speak to you when this is happening. Now, some of that you're never going to be able to change. Some people just put their head in the sand when they're in financial difficulties. But you, as an institution, as a company, like, your responsibility is to try and look at those people and try and get them to contact. And I would say that just treating people like grown-ups, and I think it's a problem with a lot of communications from Twitter, Facebook, everything that's happened in COVID. I think over time, like, treating people like grown-ups I think it's an attractive quality.
Trust is such an interesting concept. I love it because it's something you can relate to, and as a human, you can relate to it, and it takes time to build up trust, doesn't it? You've got to do the stuff. Trust is about what you did 6 months ago as about what you do now, and it's very hard to change it now. You've got to look back over 6 months and say, what did I do over there? Because that goes into the way people process around whether they trust you or not.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to you can look at it from a customer experience perspective. You can also look at it from an employee experience perspective as well. So like there's a tremendous amount of distrust around speech analytics from employees because they're like, well, you're just always monitoring me. When we do work, hopefully, like we put people in the ground. I sat in contact centres with agents around me watching what I do and going, this isn't to make your life harder. And this is to, number one, it's to make your life easier. Number two, not make you feel like trying to get the best out of you as you can, because that'll increase sales. And I think the third thing, just to touch upon, is like human to human augmented service is the best. I don't care what anybody says, but it is the best. Like knowing that you're speaking to a human, but having the agent being armed with all of the tools, with the best scripts, with the recommendation engine, like being coached correctly, like that is the best experience. And what I kind of say to some of these guys, if I'm being like super brutal, is we want to give you all of the tools because like loads of people just want to alternate and that's a much worse place to be, because then like people's roles and stuff will disappear. Whereas if you maximize the value of the human to human interaction, like that's going to take years and years and years to replicate.
Human to human interaction is like incredibly powerful, and you talked a bit about it from a customer, like customer to company, human to human interaction. But I suppose that's also true in terms of like employee to employee interaction, or employee to manager interaction. Human to human is kind of like is kind of one of the best ways of sort of getting to know people. How much do you think we've lost with I suppose the pandemic and remote working, and where do you think we'll go as a result of that in terms of like coaching tools as well? I mean, how does that kind of link together in terms of some of the customer observations?
I always go like 18 months ago. I can't remember, all of them blended into one, but 16 months ago, we gave guys a laptop and a headset and like sent them off home.
Off you go.
Yeah, off you go. Go and do that job that you did in the office, but go and do it like in your house. And we did so out of necessity, but we didn't do a lot to help them to give them the tools necessary to be able to perform in those types of environments. Now, some of us are very lucky, like some of us have got a house and we've got a garden and can go and take a break and stuff. But a lot of people like weren't in that situation and didn't have the right setup at home, were locked in a room and locked in a room. Sometimes some of my friends who work on the phones, there's 3 of them that live in the house. Yeah, exactly. Just stuck to the screen. And so customer service in lots of different ways has slipped. Contact centers in particular, but there's an element of robustness there. But I'll just digress a second. But you can see customer service in restaurants and things like that just isn't as good as it was like 2 years ago. And that's because like the guys in those types of sectors are like, well, why would I put myself in a position to be locked down and not have a job again? Like I need to go and find something else. So customer service in general has kind of got difficult. So I come from a data visualization background, and I love visualization. I love making things like spin on the page and look all pretty. But I've started to, over the last kind of 20 months, think, well, is that really the best way of displaying information? Because when you take data and you display it in like a visualization bar chart or a pie chart or a line graph or whatever, you then add a barrier, which is and a person's ability to understand that. And it's that kind of like that kind of semantic layer. We were doing a lot of coaching stuff and saying, look, this is these are your top performers, these are your bottom performers, but in visuals. And nobody was adopting it, or a very small percentage were adopting it. Through our tools now, we're kind of changing that. It kind of goes, this person needs coaching on X because of Y in plain English.
Yeah.
Go and push this button and go and schedule a coaching conversation.
Yeah.
This person has done really well across the board. Give them a pat on the back and send them an email.
Yeah.
And that type of direct information, like specifically prescriptively saying what a team manager needs to do or an ops manager needs to do, I think that'll become more and more prevalent over the next kind of, well, from now until forever, because why put a visualization in when you can just directly tell people what to do? It removes all nuance.
So one thing I wanted to ask you before we finish was a little bit about, so I've been following you on LinkedIn and social media and those kind of things, and you certainly have a lot of fun in your posts. And so a question I wanted to ask is, do you think we've all become a little bit too dull and corporate in some of our interactions? What's your approach? What's your approach on that?
So if I go back to kind of like who I am as a person, so I just I like to have a joke, and I like to have a laugh, and I like to provoke conversation things just in like my non-digital life. And I've been like that for, since day dot. However, it's like it's not that. And so on LinkedIn, so that's how I am in work. Spend any time at work, like a huge chunk of your day, like 8, 9, 10. Like for me, probably like 12, 13 hours a day at work. So if you're always just talking about work and talking about work stuff, and data science, it can be like completely like boring talking about like specific algorithms or specific tech or this. Like that's not really what my work life has ever been. Like most of it's about like making friends with people and like and joking with people, and a lot of people, even the most passionate people who are most passionate and competent at the job, a chunk of the day is spent like, what's the word? Like trying to avoid doing their job, and taking a little bit of a break from it, and smoothing things over. So I kind of took that into my LinkedIn and just started posting, things that I thought would make people laugh, things I thought would be funny. I honestly believe that LinkedIn is the best place for that at the moment. So Twitter is terrible. Like Twitter is terrible for conversations and terrible for decent debate. And Facebook isn't too far behind, and you kind of have a kind of closed community on Facebook anyway. And what I found is that because of the professionalization of LinkedIn, where most people are there in professional capacity, you can have great conversations around work, but you can also have decent conversations about just like relatable, like funny things. And then you can also have relatively civilized but passionate debates about other subjects that don't often spill over into like just name calling. And therefore, like that's why I think like maybe it become too serious. Lots of people post to me going, you shouldn't post that. It's like, come on, you can just ignore me, or you can just block me.
Jimmy, thanks very much for making the time and chatting with me. It's fascinating. We've got a lot of topics there, and very, very interesting. So I really appreciate it, and thanks very much.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, let's do it again.
You're quite welcome.